Hi, I'm Teresa, and I'm a tutor. And today I'm talking about why it's a good idea to read with your child through elementary school. By about middle school, they can really just start reading stuff on their own because there really isn't that building of skill happening as much anymore. Because after about sixth grade, the words don't necessarily get much harder, but the content does. But through elementary school, your kid, especially in the beginning, like between kindergarten and third grade, your kid learns the alphabet, learns how to read, and switches from picture books to chapter books. So the growth curve for reading really goes like this. And as a result, there's a lot of brain stuff happening all the time and a lot of learning, and that is very tiring. But one of the ways to keep a kind of healthy reading culture in your family is to read together. Reading with your child as a baby and a toddler, and when they're first learning how to read, really is encouraging to a child and really allows them to develop how they themselves are going to read, when to read. Like if you read books as a bedtime story and then they start reading on their own, you can have them read a little bit before they go to bed. And then you read a little bit that helps them to kind of wind down into sleep. And then as they get a little bit older and they're reading more and better, it is not uncommon for parents to drop off on the reading. But I recommend not dropping off the reading together too soon. First of all, it is always a good idea to know what your child is reading, what media they're consuming. And I'm not saying this from a we should ban it perspective, because I don't believe in banning books. I believe that knowing what your child is reading so that you can discuss it with them and help control the narrative and iron things out on what is good and what is bad, and bringing morality to what your child is reading, bringing your morality to what your child is reading, is actually very important. And this doesn't stop when your kid is in third grade and is reading chapter books, because they're still getting better at it. And a child's brain still gets tired. And you still want that kind of connection because, number two, reading with your child is kind of like book club. And book club is fun. It's sharing an experience of reading the same book and actually having someone to discuss it with. And that is so crucial to your child's emotional development. You know, children who read become very sympathetic and empathic to other real life people. It broadens their horizons into something that their own lived experience will probably never show them. And it gives you the opportunity to discuss these different thoughts, feelings, opinions, and experiences in a safe environment for your kids. This brings to mind two books from my own personal experience. They dealt with some pretty deep, dark, serious stuff. The first one was Oliver Twist. When I was in fifth grade in my music class, we watched Oliver, which is the musical version of Oliver Twist. And, you know, it's a musical and it's a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed it. So I nagged my parents and we borrowed it from the VHS rental place, because that shows how old I am. And we watched it. Now, in this musical, also in the original novel by Dickens, there's a character named Nancy. Now, Nancy is introduced as the heart of the gang. Everybody loves her. She's wonderful. She's fun. And Oliver just basically falls in love with her right away. She is dating / living with the bad guy, Bill, who the minute we introduce to him, you know, the music turns evil and we know he's the bad guy. He is not nice to anyone and he is very scary. But they're together until Now, real quick spoiler alert for a book that's definitely in the public domain now, but Bill kills Nancy. When we got to that part in the movie at school, my teacher fast forwarded it. Even though it doesn't take place on screen, it's still pretty traumatic, and we were 10-year-old kids. My mom let me watch it, and it wasn't traumatizing. I was just very sad because my favorite character, and kind of the only female character in the whole thing who wasn't an extra, died. And then we got the Wishbone version. We'd seen the Wishbone episode. We got the Wishbone version of the book, which is a 10-year-old appropriate version, probably, honestly, 3rd grade. But anyway, and we were reading it together in the evenings. And we got to Nancy's death. And again, this is a sanitized version, appropriate for a kid, but it was still sad. And I asked my mom, why would Nancy date Bill if he was going to kill her? And my mom said, well, she didn't know he was going to kill her. She hadn't read the book, which made me laugh. And I said, but why would she date him if he was always so mean? And my mom told me that it's because she loved him. And sometimes people love somebody so much that they don't notice that they're not nice. And they think that the good times are worth it to get through the bad times. My mom basically in that moment explained domestic violence to me. And I decided right then and there that I was never going to date somebody who was mean. Whenever I had a romantic partner who stopped treating me as if I was a worthwhile person, that was a signal to me that was time to break up. I've never been in an abusive relationship. My parents were not abusive to each other. They are still not abusive to each other. They're still married to each other and love each other. And so this was something that was definitely outside of my experience, but because of that, it was able to inform me on what to look for in a potential partner. And my husband is not abusive. He is very sweet and kind and cuddly, and I love him, and he listens very well, and we don't have an abusive relationship. So that informed me of a life decision. Another book that I read that I think pretty much every middle school or early high school student somehow manages to find is the book Speak. And it's about a young teen girl who gets raped and how she deals with it and processes it, and how she kind of gets over it and is able to accuse her attacker. Because of this book, I was able to kind of recognize people who were not safe to be around. And I've always been able to make sure to never be alone with people that maybe weren't so trustworthy. Also, realizing that this does happen, these kinds of stories are valid, and just because it hasn't happened to me doesn't mean that I can't see it happening to somebody else, and that it does deserve sympathy. So because of that book, even though that's definitely not something in the realm of my experience, because I did have a protected childhood growing up, it was something that I could be exposed to. And because I was I think I was about 12 or 13 when I read that book, I brought it up to my mom. Because here's the third thing that happens when you read with your child and you discuss these difficult things with them. And it's something that's constant while they grow up. You bond with your child. You become a safe person for your child to talk to in hard circumstances. And because I'd talked with my mom about Nancy and Oliver Twist, I felt safe asking my mom about the protagonist in Speak. And we talked about sex, we talked about rape, We talked about how to recognize a good partner and how to keep yourself safe. Through reading this book and through having a good relationship with my mom, I could discuss it with her. It helped demystify something that was totally outside of my experience yet again. And there is a fourth thing. It's going to sound a little Big Brother-ish, but keeping an eye on what your kid is reading and knowing what they're reading and being prepared for questions they are very likely going to ask sooner rather than later. And I do not believe in censoring what a kid reads. I believe that a kid can pick up a book and read it and get out of it what they want. Another example from my own life was when I was in 10th grade, so I was about 15 years old, and I read the PMS Outlaws. I got it from the mystery section at the library. It was in the adult half, not the kid half, It was not a teen book. It was from where the grown-ups got to read their books. And I thought it was funny because I knew what PMS was. And the back of the book talked about the actual mystery part of it, which was that two women were seducing a man and then getting him into a compromising situation, stripping him of clothes, and then robbing him and leaving him in a compromising position to be found, usually naked and in handcuffs. And he'd be found like the next morning when somebody working there got there. So that's what I thought I was getting into. I did not expect there to be a B plot about a woman who was a down and out opera singer who got super drunk and basically her life was falling apart. That part wasn't so bad, but she joins a bit of a cult that winds up summoning a bull goddess that does a lot of lesbian sex stuff. I was not emotionally ready for that. I did not understand any of that. And when I had to do a book report on it, I kept it to the mystery side. I did not bring up the devolving drunk opera singer or the lesbian sex cult stuff, or how any of that intersected with the mystery part. And I honestly don't remember how the mystery ended. I was just like, whoa, this book is a lot. Not really recommended. It's not a particularly good book, if I recall correctly. But yeah. And my 10th grade teacher said, wow, you really handled the risque subject matter very well. And I said, oh, you don't even know a half of it. I left out 2/3 of the plot. So kids can totally wind up reading something that just goes whoo over their heads. And besides, censorship doesn't work. My dad tried to do that when I was, again, in high school. I was reading the Clan of the Cave Bear books because I really enjoyed the story of Ayla and how, she starts off with the Neanderthals and then she winds up finding, living alone for a while in book 2, and then she meets Jondalar, and then she finds out that there are a lot of others like her, and then she and Jondalar wind up going back to his people. But starting when Ayla meets Jondalar, they have a lot of sex. And my dad did not feel comfortable about me reading all these sex scenes. And so he had a copy. It was a paperback copy, and he let me borrow it, but he went through and stapled all of the sex scenes pages together. I just couldn't read the sex scenes. And I understood where he was coming from. I kind of put up with it, and I skipped the sex scenes. And then I wanted to read the third book because now we've got more people involved in the plot, and it was more interesting. And my dad was thinking about doing the same censoring thing. And then what I wound up doing was I went to my school library, not even the public library, just the school one, and I found this book series there. And I told my dad, if you're going to censor the sex scenes, I'm just going to go rent the book from school and I'm going to read that one because this is stupid. And by the way, I can just, he'd staple it on top. I could open the pages kind of like this and still read most of it pretty easily. So he gave up. He realized it was pointless because I found a way around it. And whenever you censor books, that's exactly what happens. The kid is going to find a way around it. And I find that if you really restrict things, refuse to answer questions, have a long list of things your child can't do, a lot of kids start feeling the need to go around the parent. Versus if you allow them to read it and discuss the content with them, it is demystified. There is no allure. And they trust you to be able to talk to you, so they're not going to go around you and then find themselves in over their head on a bunch of subject matter. It's one of those judgment calls, and it's totally valid to be like reading Death Note and be like, you know what? I really don't think this is appropriate for you. How about you read this again when you're 16 and we'll talk about it then. Most kids, especially if this only happens on occasion, they won't like it, but they're much more likely to just accept it. Anyway, I hope you found this helpful. I realize on this one I am talking about my own personal opinion, but having dealt with a lot of kids with restrictive parents who are going around their parents a lot, I do find that this to be a little bit more, it's a gray area, but my experience shows this is kind of a better way to handle it. Not the only way, just a better one. But please remember, you are doing a good job. Bye.